The purpose of the Global CFO Council is to provide an educational and networking forum for senior financial executives in order to share best practices, discuss current financial issues, and to learn about current topics related to the performance of their jobs. Membership is open to senior financial executives including CFOs, financial VPs, and treasurers. We hope that you'll become a member of the Global CFO Council today. To join, please visit the membership tab at globalcfocouncil.com.
Ellie Taylor is an account executive with Paylocity. Ellie, I think you're a UCF graduate from the great state of Florida. My mom used to live around there, and it's pretty much taken up all of Central Florida. I think there's 50,000, 60,000 students that go to UFC. So congratulations, you're taking over the state. And something interesting I think about you is I think you grew up in St. Augustine, went to St. Augustine High School. Is that correct?
I did. The oldest city in the country.
Bam. And Sherry. All right, so I'm going to get to some stuff I hope is true. Sometimes I am famously wrong and embarrassingly wrong, but I'm going out on a limb on some of this, and I'm going to stretch here, and I'm going to hope some of this is right. So Sherry, senior manager at Paylocity, and I think you got your undergraduate degree from Judson University and a couple of master's degree from DeVry. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. And I think you live in Illinois. Is that correct?
I do.
And married, 3 kids?
Married, 3 kids, almost 25 years.
And I think that your husband is a firefighter, brave firefighter. Well, very lucky that there are folks like your husband out there sacrificing, and that you're a super volunteer in the community, including your alma mater. And it looks like a lacrosse club. Maybe you or one of the kids play some lacrosse, and then you're a certified everything, including a SHRM SCP. Is that correct?
That is correct. And that is a great throwback. I was 19 in that picture.
Well, you look fantastic. It looks like your husband is about 8 years old and you look about 9. So
yes, we were very young.
Well, congratulations. That's really, really fantastic. And I'm going to let you share your screen in just a second. I'm going to transition your role to that. While we're doing some behind the scenes stuff here, Ellie, will you get us started? In about 10 seconds, we'll even faster than 10 seconds. Sherry's a professional. All right, I'm going to mute myself. I very much look forward to your presentation, and I will hit you up with some questions in the middle and at the end.
Thank you, Robert. I appreciate it. And thank you, Global CFO Council, for inviting us to speak today. I'm Ellie Taylor, HCM Account Executive here in Greenville, Spartanburg. I'm joined with my peers, Lauren Dudding. She oversees Charleston, and Jason Roden over in Columbia. Not sure if you've heard of Paylocity, but we are the all-in-one innovative solution for the modern workforce. But let's be honest, that's not why you joined this call today. We are salespeople. So I want to introduce our speaker today, Sherry Simpson. She's our Senior Manager of HR Thought Leadership. She comes to us with over 16 plus years of experience, and as a multi-talented HR expert, she brings a fresh and veteran perspective to various subjects, from training and development to talent acquisition and employee relations. So without further ado, I'm going to let Sherry go ahead and take over.
Thank you so much, Ellie. And Robert, I have to admit that is probably one of the most surprising intros I have ever gotten. I absolutely loved it. I'm totally stealing it for my future webinar, so I appreciate that. All right, let's get into it. I want to start by setting the stage about where we've been since March of 2020. And I think that when the pandemic first started, it was one of those things where we kind of all knew where we were. In fact, we attended an employee experience conference in Florida late February. And I remember coming back and telling my boss, hey, it's kind of weird. Like, there was a lot of people on the plane wearing masks, and like everybody's kind of overreacting. It's not really even in the US yet. I don't know why we're so worried about it. And 2.5 weeks later, we got sent home. Everybody in our office got sent home. And I remember thinking, it's fine. It's only going to be a couple weeks, right? Lockdown will last 2 weeks. And then it lasted 2 weeks and a month and a couple months. And then we didn't go back to the office for a very long time. In fact, Paylocity just brought some of our workforce back into the office just this September as a requirement. So when you think about what we've been through the last 3 years, I'm just amazed. It's continued to change. We've had to deal with, everything resulting from the pandemic, right? Masks, no masks, vaccines, no vaccines. Are we going to go hybrid? Are we going to go fully remote? What if we can't do that? How do we support our organizations? Then we saw a controversial presidential election. We had the murder of George Floyd, which increased our focus on DEI efforts. We saw things like Russia invading Ukraine. We had the US Supreme Court overturn Roe v. Wade. We had Silicon Valley Bank fail. And then just in the last, few weeks, we've seen the Hamas and Israel conflict. Just the last weekend, employers had to deal with some big banks not direct depositing employees' checks, right? So that's all the things that we've had to continue to deal with. And as we look forward, we're having a controversial presidential election coming up again. And so there's all this chatter about how do we think about supporting our employees in this future of work. So I want to spend some time talking about what is the future of work. And I think this is one of those terms that can be a catchphrase. HR loves their catchphrases. We've done great resignation, the great reshuffle, the quiet quitting, the quiet hiring. I think the future of work is one of those terms that's going to stick with us for a little while to help define the changes that we're seeing and the trends that we expect to see that are really going to shape the way that we work in the next coming years. So as I think about those buckets, I want to cover a couple of them as to what the future of work is going to look like for us. And let's start with automation and artificial intelligence. If you don't know what ChatGPT is, you definitely should look it up. It's a great generative AI tool. And it's one of the things that I talk to HR professionals and business professionals a lot about as a tool that you can use to help yourself. Do I think that robots are going to take over our jobs like you see in the picture? No, I don't think that. I do think, though, that technology is going to become a partner in ways we haven't thought of before. I'll give you a great example. I was traveling a couple of weeks ago. I was heading to the HR Tech Conference to talk about the future of work, sitting in the United Club, and the concierge robot comes by to take my dirty dishes, right? No longer a person is doing that. You have to put your dishes on the robot cart and it takes it away. So I think about the way that that's going to change the way that we work. And ChatGPT is a great tool to think about. So if you aren't using it, like I said, it's a great tool to jump into. Think about it as an intern, right? You're working on a draft, an email, a communication, and you want somebody to write a first draft for you. You can go in and you can prompt it and say, hey, I'm sending out a communication. I'd like you to impersonate an employee that I'm delivering this. Here's the bullet points I'm trying to make. Can you create this for me? The thing I will say about automation and AI that we have to be concerned about is the ethical ramification. So you should be putting your proprietary information in there. If you're using technology and tools that have AI built into them, you should do a little digging to find out about the ethics around how that AI was created and how it's going to be used. Just like any technology, we have to be careful about the bias that's going to bring in. So that's AI and automation. Next is work flexibility. When I started in my career, remote work was not a thing. And when it first started to kind of come around in my world, it was definitely used as a carrot, right? So you go into an interview and somebody might say, hey, by the way, you can work remote 1 day a week. And I akin that to kind of like if you were in this environment before where you had to dress business and then maybe on Fridays you got business casual, right? And that was a little carrot. That's not the reality anymore. Workplace flexibility is expected, either remote work or hybrid work, or even if you're completely on site, flexibility is required. And I'll talk a little bit later about how we can bring flexibility into those roles that are completely on site. Next is the gig economy, right? As we think about Gen Z in the workforce now, one of the things that we're seeing a lot of is how they think about customization, right? Everything in the world has been customized. Think about their Spotify playlist, their YouTube recommendations, their Netflix recommendations. How they consume content is all geared to how they, the things that they want to see. So why wouldn't their jobs be any different? And so we're seeing them piecemeal jobs together to curate a job that works best for them. So as we think about our internal organizations, how do we start to bring in some of that idea around gig economy and giving people the opportunity to kind of curate their own jobs inside our organizations? One of the ways you can do this is to think about how you leverage people's different skills, things that they're already doing maybe as a side hustle. Can you have them do it inside your organization? You know, one of the things that we did a couple of years ago as we started to do more public webinars is I had made a joke off the cuff of like, hey, we really should have hair and makeup for these as we get ready. Turns out somebody in the room had a cousin who worked for the company whose side hustle was hair and makeup. And the next webinar, we brought them in for a couple minutes to do hair and makeup. What a great opportunity to leverage an employee's skill set and have them have a passion at work that is kind of outside the scope of what they would normally do. Obviously, I'm not getting into pay and how you do that. It's just something you could think about because you don't want to complicate, obviously, the finances when it comes to how you're paying employees, but really urging you to think about outside the box when it comes to gig economy. Next is skills-based. And what I mean by this is how we're looking at job architecture. So right now, when you write a job description, there's, you know, your paragraph talking about the job, there's the required skills, there's the preferred skills, some education, you'll have your DEIA statement in there, you might have compensation in there. But that doesn't necessarily play to a skill set somebody might have. So if you think about jobs changing differently to be based on skills, you can look at the skills across your organization and see where you have skill gaps and where you can leverage skills that maybe aren't being used for a particular role. So if you know what skills are needed in which role, you can move people in your organization so much differently. So you might have somebody who's working in your accounting department, but let's say that when you look at their skill set, they have some marketing skills in their background that they're not utilizing. So maybe you could pull them into a new role or give them an opportunity as a gig to leverage some of those skills. So we're going to see a lot of changes when it comes to how we think about traditional job descriptions moving to a more skills-based idea. Next is DEIA and B. So I'm sure you've all heard of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now we're seeing organizations add an A for accessibility or B for belonging. I recently was just at the SHRM Inclusion Conference, and they actually are talking about now IED, putting that inclusion first. I'll wrap this into the rest of the conversation because this ties into how we think about culture, how we think about creating environments where employees are engaged. And so we need to change our definition of how we're thinking about diversity, equity, inclusion as we move towards a more future mindset of work. Next is sustainability. If you aren't getting these questions in your interview process, I won't be surprised if you start to see them soon. We now have candidates asking us about our carbon footprint. Are we doing carbon offset? They're asking about our physical buildings and things like, are we doing composting? Do we use biodegradable single-use items when we're feeding our employees, right? These are questions we didn't hear 2-3 years ago. And now people are making hiring decisions on what organizations they want to go to based on maybe some of your sustainability principles, especially if you have to do ESG reporting and those kinds of things. Lastly, but not least, is ROWE, results-oriented work. So gone are the days, I think, when we used to think if we walked past somebody and we could see them working, we know they're working. Okay, let's be real. We all learned really early on in our careers how to quickly switch screens when our bosses were walking by so that there was always work on the screen, right? Let's start talking about and thinking about how we pay for the performance we want and not necessarily pay for the time that they're in their seats. That's a change. That's by introduced results-oriented work many years ago, but we've definitely seen a resurgence of this ideology and way of thinking about work coming out of the pandemic and some of the things we've seen there. So those are the big buckets that we have to think about when we come to the table about future of work. So when we think back to January of 2020, the HR landscape was pretty diverse. We were all kind of focusing on different things, but as we kind of came through the pandemic and we look at what we're facing now, a lot of the things that we're trying to tackle are very similar and fall into these major buckets, right? We're thinking about streamlining and automating our processes and leveraging technology. We're trying to think about how we attract and retain talent, especially as we're going to see, our millennials being our future leaders, Gen Z entering the workforce, and then as Gen Alpha comes up, right? They're still pretty young right now, but for those of us on the call, we probably will see some Gen Alphas in our workforce in the next 10 years. And then how do we continue to think about building culture and connection? We do all of this and we expect our managers to be able to execute on it. And when I think about everything I just talked about, right, you have these expectations from employees, right? They want you to be employee centric. They want you to be more transparent. They want you to deliver collaboration and opportunities for growth and be very transparent and be well-being responsive, right? You're getting all of these requests from your employees. And then you think about leadership, right? Those of us that are in upper management, obviously those that are on the call that are CFOs, you expect your middle managers to be strategic partners. You want them to be adaptable. You want them to be the curators of great employee experiences. You want them to think strategically and cross-collaborate and be great, effective communicators. And so middle managers are kind of stuck in this spot of how do I figure this out and how do we equip them? I want to give you an example of something that really stuck with me to highlight what this means to be a middle manager and how we think about middle managers getting to their positions. So as Robert said, I have 3 boys. I have 3 kids. I have 3 boys. They're actually all active duty military in the Navy. And my middle guy was purchasing a ticket for his girlfriend to come visit. So he called me and he was like, hey, Mom, walk me through how to buy the ticket. I haven't done it before. And I was like, sure. Here's how you go find a ticket. Here's how you research best deals, Google flights, all the things. Let me know if you need anything else. He's like, no, I think I got it. Great. Didn't think about it for a couple months. Calls me a couple days before his girlfriend's supposed to fly out. And he goes, hey, Mom, I got the ticket, but like, when do I get the ticket? I was like, well, what do you mean? When do you get the ticket? I was like, you didn't think I was buying the ticket, right? Because then I got worried like I was buying the ticket. He's like, no. He's like, I bought the ticket. I paid for it. He's like, but like, when does she get the ticket? I was like, can you ask the question a different way? Like, I don't get what you're asking me. He goes, Mom, when we go to the airport and there's the paper ticket and you scan it to get through security, where does she get the ticket? I've never laughed out loud so hard at one of my kids. And I was like, oh, you mean the boarding pass, the one that your mom, who's still, Gen X, prints out at home and brings with her to the airport so that they can scan it. I was like, there is no ticket. It's the app. She gets it on her phone. She just scans it. And he was like, oh, I had no idea. I assumed I was getting a ticket in the mail. I think about this when we think about our managers, right? Managers, as an employee, right? You look at your manager and you go, I have a great manager. If I want to become a manager someday, that's how I want to do it. I want to be like that person. Or if you have a bad manager, right? I know if I become a manager someday, those are the things I'm not going to do, right? But if you don't teach your managers how to do it, they're going to walk into a situation or walk into a room and go, where's the ticket? How do I get this? Shouldn't I have the ticket already? And it's really interesting. I actually just read an article on SHRM and it talked about a survey done just in 2023 by Harris Research and OJI, which is a provider of skills training. They surveyed 2,066 employees that examined the performance of first-time managers. This is what they found. 41% that they were stressed or anxious about reporting to work because of their manager. 34% wanted to leave the organization. 31% wanted to change managers by changing jobs or teams within their company. And 31% lost confidence in their company overall. Those are staggering statistics when it comes to how our employees see our organizations. So it's important for us to equip our managers to be successful. So let's talk about how we do this. Where do we even start? We start with employee engagement because I think this can be our bedrock for everything we need to build on and how we need to think about equipping our managers to think through these different things. And I want to read this Gartner definition of employee experience because I think it's one of the best out there. Employee experience is the way in which employees internalize and interpret the interactions they have with their organization, as well as the context that underlies those interactions. The reason I love this definition is because of that very last part of that sentence. as well as the context that underline those interactions. We all know when people are being authentic with us. We know when our organizations are just giving us a line or just checking a box or just showing up in the moment and not necessarily thinking about the big picture for us as employees. So it's important as we go through this to understand the context of what's being done and be genuine about it and really want to equip our managers to create these great experiences. And so when you think about creating those experiences, there's some buckets. We need to build psychological safety. We need to support flexibility and automation. We have to think about how we're going to encourage growth, create that communication cadence, lead change, and then obviously leverage the right technology. Obviously, somebody who works at a technology company, I want to make sure you guys are leveraging the right technology. I think that's important, especially as we think about future of work and AI and automation that's happening. So let's start with psychological safety. And I'm going to be really transparent and share a story from my career that highlighted for me what psychological safety really, really means and how it can show up in a very positive way. So this was about 10 years ago now. I was stepping into an organization as the HR leader. Was there a couple weeks, and my boss pulled me aside and said, "Hey, I need to share some context about our organization with you, and then I need to give you a task. Because I want you to understand, kind of what you're going to be dealing with over the next few weeks and some of the struggles you might have." So my boss begins to share with me that the previous HR person, who had been somebody who grew up in the company, had embezzled money through payroll. And the embezzlement had been $500,000. And so the organization was very attuned to what was happening with the HR person. They wanted to make sure that they hired somebody with integrity and a great track record, obviously somebody that had high attention to detail, could handle difficult conversations because there was going to be a lot of eyes on them. That's a lot to get in your first couple of weeks to find out that information and having it not be shared during the interview process. So I was like, all right, I got this. I know myself. I'm a consummate professional. It's going to be fine. What's the task you got to have me do? We've been saving some terminations for you. I don't know who should be saving terminations for anybody. Don't save your terminations for new HR people. It's the worst. You don't want them to be the Grim Reaper. I was like, okay, who are the terms we're going to do? Well, I need you to term the CFO, the COO, and the director of maintenance. I was like, oh, so just, like a couple low-level employees that I have to term. I was like, please tell me we're doing severance packages. Yeah, we're doing severance packages. I was like, all right, do they know what's coming? What are the performance conversations happened? They don't know what's coming. We haven't had performance conversations, right? So think about all of that as I go into the room. I'm going to conduct the CFO termination first. And of course, I'm anxious. Of course, I'm nervous, right? Knowing the background of what's happened in this organization. I walk in, I have a very tough conversation with this person. Obviously, they're upset. They didn't know it was coming, gave them their paperwork, walked out of the room and was like, okay, that one's done. The CEO wasn't there that day. They were out. They were going to be back the next day. So we had a day or so to handle the next ones. Get down to my office, kind of debriefing myself from all of that. And I get a phone call from the terminated CFO. And he goes, "Hey, Sherry, I just looked at my paperwork. You gave me the severance package for the COO." My heart sank. I had handed him the wrong paperwork. I was so focused on not screwing this up that I didn't put names on the folders on purpose so that there wasn't anybody couldn't walk into my office and see that. So I hung up the phone. I walked upstairs to my boss and I said, I effed up. I effed up really, really bad. Here's what happened. Fully assuming I would get terminated, right? I probably would have terminated myself at that point, knowing what was happening in the organization. And she looked at me and she goes, "Tell me what happened." I walked her through it. I said, "Hey, I didn't put the names on the folder on purpose, blah, blah, blah." And she goes, "I bet that will never happen again." And I was like, "Well, no, obviously this is never going to happen again." She's like, "All right." She's like, "Let's go let the president know what happened. Let's get the CFO the correct paperwork and let's learn from our experience." And I remember walking away from that moment thinking, that's psychological safety. This person now I know has my back no matter what. This person knows that people make honest, genuine mistakes. This person knows that if something's difficult, I have integrity and I'm going to take ownership for it right away. And that built this trust that I've never seen before in a manager. And so that's a very extreme example of psychological safety, right? That's not necessarily something that you're going to do in your organization, but we can take steps in the right direction. And so what is on screen is a Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you haven't seen this, Maslow is somebody who argued that survival needs need to be satisfied before an individual can really satisfy those higher needs of esteem and self-actualization. So on the left-hand side of the screen is where he has kind of brought those things to life from his model. And the right side is where those come to life in the work. And if you think about that, right, walking your managers through this concept of building safety, we can really create great experiences. So let's meet our physical needs of our employees, right? Creating that safe, healthy workplace where employees can feel secure and they have the right resources they need from a pay and benefits perspective. Next, think about their safety needs, right? Go back to COVID, right? How do we think about keeping them safe in the office? Do they have ergonomic equipment? Do they have protections from harassment or discrimination? Next, how are we fostering those social needs, especially if you're a fully remote environment? How are you thinking about the social connections that we lost coming out of the office? Next, esteem needs, right? Are we offering opportunities for professional development, celebrating individual successes, making sure that there's clear ways to get promoted, having visibility to the work that we're doing? And then as we come to that self-actualization, right? How do we allow our employees to have some autonomy in how they approach their work and provide an environment that encourages some of that risk-taking, creativity, and agility that we want to see? If we do this, right, we're going to see improved productivity, increased engagement, reduction in absenteeism, fewer accidents, and ultimately we're going to be able to attract top talent because we have this methodology and how we approach providing safety for our employees. Next up is when we think about flexibility. And I don't mean necessarily introducing yoga at your desk. If you can do this, you have great flexibility. I'm very impressed. But the pandemic really forced us to think about how we can bring flexibility into our cultures in different ways than we haven't before. So some of the obvious answers, right? Hybrid work, remote work, maybe flexible schedules, job sharing. Those are things we've all seen before. One of the things I want to encourage you, if you have an organization where your employees have continued to be fully on site, maybe you're manufacturing, right? And you think about flexibility, you're like, hey, I can't really offer a ton of flexibility. This job can't be done from home. My husband cannot be a battalion fire chief from home. He's got to be in the office. So what kind of flexibility can you bring to your organization? So let's say you offer shift swapping, and right now that is being handled by somebody in HR, maybe somebody in upper leadership is making sure that those things get done. What if you can put that autonomy back into the hands of the employee? Create some criteria about who and who cannot shift swap, but let them manage that. Let them manage their schedules themselves. The next thing is think about creativity when it comes to flexibility. Maybe your organization hasn't ever worked on a Saturday, or maybe you don't have staggered shifts, right? Are those things that you can introduce into your organization? Beyond that, I think there is an opportunity for us to think about flexibility differently and how we offer different things to our employees. So if you're not doing like a broad benefits survey where you can find out what your employees want and give them that flexibility, kind of pick and choose how you design your benefits programs, that's another way. One of the things we found out at Paylocity when we did that is we had an overwhelming percentage of our employees who wanted pet insurance added to our benefits offerings, right? That's not necessarily something we would have uncovered if we hadn't done that survey and thought about the flexibility that we need there. Next up is developing that growth mindset, right? When I think about managers being in the roles that they're in, I think one of the things that we forget is that they need to continue to learn and develop their skills along the way beyond just the tactical stuff. So long we've talked about, can your managers have soft skills, and are soft skills important? And I think about this a little bit differently now. I think about the totality of the skill set, right? I want a manager who can be strategic, who can be data driven, who can be analytical, but I also want them to have empathy. I also want them to understand basic motivators for employee. I want them to understand how their employees like to be communicated to, how they get communicated with. And so think about providing that for your managers, right? Encourage a culture that really embraces learning and development. And you can do this in a really simple way. Hey, what's a podcast you've been listening to that you were really inspired about? What's a book you read? Who do you follow on TikTok that inspires you? Some of you may not know what TikTok is, right? It's a social media platform, all video driven, but there's a lot of really great content being put out there right now from a bunch of different creators. And so start having those conversations about how people are growing. Next, you got to provide opportunities for that professional growth and learning. So maybe that's a conference. Maybe that's internally, you have people come and speak and do a lunch and learn. Maybe it's a virtual online training course. There's a lot of really great stuff out there virtually. In fact, I'm attending a conference tomorrow all around AI. It was only $100 to attend virtually for an all-day conference. So get a little bit creative when you think about developing your employees. Next, give really, really great feedback. You know, I think earlier in my career, I got the idea from somebody like, hey, feedback needs to come in a compliment sandwich, right? You got to give like, here's what you're doing really good. Here's what you're not doing good. But I really like this about you. Again, going back to transparency, that seems kind of fake, right? If you're coming to the conversation with empathy and compassion, you can have a realistic conversation about growth. Hey, Sherry, you know what? I see that you're excelling in this area. One of the things that would help lead you to the next level is if you could work on A, B, and C skills, right? I'm acknowledging where you're at, giving you the feed forward advice that you need to grow and to ultimately impact our business, right? That's what we really want. Encourage collaboration and teamwork. You know, we are only as good as I think the team that's around us. So how do we leverage those skills and the team members that we have to communicate with? And then lead by example, right? What are you sharing as a leader? How are you talking about your growth? How are you talking about the things that you know you're not good at? And what you're doing to change those or to grow in those areas. So Robert, I know that I had maybe questions at the next slide, but I think I'm going to pause here because I think this might be a good spot to get to some questions before I go to the next slide.
They are piling up. I'm going to hit you a rapid fire because I got 10 already. So
great.
I'm going to combine a few, and it's, I think I know I said chat. It's the Q&A because I disabled chat because some of you were chatting with each other last time and distracting me. So I disabled chat. So it's Q&A if you have questions. And here's some of the questions. I'm going to combine 3, back a few slides, the hierarchy of needs. And I got a bunch of yes, absolutelys. And I got a few, if I'm being honest, questions. So, and they were like, hey, how do you balance understanding the holistic employee with 1 and 2 year tenures of a lot of staff? How do you balance holistic equip? Hey, I'm not equipped to be a senior financial and gap expert and a therapist. And then there seems to be a lot of title inflation, and a lot of people are in that second to top pyramid around, I think it was esteem. And there's a lot of people wanting to be vice presidents and directors. So I'm gonna put, I got 4 comments and 3 questions on that slide. So I want to hit you, whatever you want to pull from that. I had a bunch of questions around there.
Yeah, let's start with the 1 to 2 year group first. So this is really interesting because as our Gen Zs come into the workforce, one of the questions that we're getting at the 90-day review time is, so I'm doing great. When do I get promoted? Right. And for us Gen Z or Gen Xers, we're like, what do you mean, when do you get promoted? You've been here 90 days, relax. But the reality is, going back to that customization I talked about, is they need a clear path for promotion. And promotion doesn't necessarily mean climbing the ladder. It could be scope, it could be change of title. So I would think about development plans are going to be really, really important. And they don't have to be super in depth, right? Think about a ladder development plan, maybe a lattice development plan, or a across the board plan. And how are you going to change the skill sets, right? Upskill those people to get there. That therapist question, I absolutely love this. I think that you're right. We all can't be therapists, but let's know our resources, right? So let's know how to ask some empathetic questions. Let's know how to approach performance not so tactically. And what I mean by that is, Let's say you have somebody who's a great performer, and all of a sudden you start to see them slip, right? Your gut might be to go to their work and go, I'm seeing typos, you're not showing up on time, like you need to fix this, right? Let's flip that up and say, hey, what's going on with you? You're usually a high performer. Here's the things I'm seeing. And you might uncover something that you're uncomfortable with, right? And so that's when you need to leverage your resources like your your EAP, your employee assistance program, or tap your HR partner. But I think this comes down to, and this is where I would challenge you, think about how you would want to be treated, right? Think about how they would want to be treated in that moment. And just provide them some humanity when it comes to that. The last one, moving from esteem to self-actualization. This is where we got to do a lot of work. I would say if you're in that role where you want to be a president and you're not there yet, here's my professional advice: go hire a coach, right? I think that is something we don't talk about enough, is that we need a mentor, we need a coach to help us get to that next level, to develop some of those skills that we don't have. I would say in your organization, if you don't have the succession plan for those roles, that's something you can start talking about and making sure that you're having those in place so that you can look at that VP level and go, okay, here's our next COO, here's our next president, here's our next CEO. So hopefully that answered some of those questions. Feel free to keep putting them in the Q&A.
Next question is around the skills-based slide. It was one of the bullet points. And the question was how to get people to sign up for the training, the certifications, the online tools, the webinars that are being offered. Anybody crack the code? Do you have any suggestions or best practices if you're trying to feed into people to give them those skills-based, but people just do not sign up for any of the resources available?
Yeah. Couple things. One, do you have a culture where it's okay to do it? And what I mean by that is, if you're telling somebody, hey, I know that you're putting in 45, 50 hours a week, and now I want you to go take an hour and attend this webinar, you're not really being empathetic to their situation. So do you have a culture where they have the time that they need to develop? Then the second piece is incentivize it. I don't necessarily mean with compensation, right? You can gamify it. You can get them a special badge. If you have an HCM system that has those kind of things built into it, use it. You can do public recognition. You can say, hey, Julie attended 3 webinars this quarter, and because of it, I've seen this change in her work and the trajectory for our business, right? Those are just some quick hits there.
That's a perfect transition to my next question. You mentioned the 45, 50 hours, and the next question was around the results-oriented work, the ROW, and moving to that. And the question popped up that they felt, and I'll say I've kind of seen this, regardless of generation or age, nobody seems to be working the amount of hours that at least I used to work when I started, and getting 45 or 50 hours a week would be like a miracle. From some team members. So just how do you balance that results-oriented work, and let's get to the results, but that the expectation isn't, okay, that means you get to lead, you just put in 4. How about you put in 44 hours? Let's get more results. Like, how do you balance results-oriented work does not mean everybody works 15 minutes a day?
Yeah, so it comes with clear expectations on what the work is that needs to be done. So if you see somebody who is, getting the work done in 2 hours, right? And you think they should be working on it in 8 hours, but what they are delivering is what is expected, then you have to think about what you're expecting out of that employee. I'll give you a funny personal example real quick. So I was actually homeschooled most of my education, but in 4th grade, I actually went to private school, and I was getting through my work really quickly and was kind of acting up in school. And the conversation that was had with me is, I was bored. I didn't have enough work to do. So that could be a part of the results-oriented work. The person might not have enough to do. There is a challenge I have to put out there, though, and this is the younger Gen X in me is, if they're getting the work done, doesn't matter how much time they're putting in. And that's where I would challenge you. Now, granted, if they're working 22 hours a week instead of 40, I'm not talking about that. But if you think a project should last 8 hours and only last 2 hours, and they are delivering it as expected, doesn't matter at the end of the day if your business is succeeding and meeting their KPIs.
I will hold all comments and move to my next question, which is some AI stuff from the beginning. People definitely got excited. I saw a bunch of questions in there. I'll hit some of it's a little compliancy and some of it's just sort of like a thought experiment. One question is, hey, any emerging AI related like labor laws or SHRM HR policies you seeing? Any kind of best practices that we need to all be on the, have our radar? Y'all should be talking about this with your HR professionals and your chief people officer. For us accountants, what should we be thinking about? AI, labor laws, SHRM? What do you think?
Yeah, so I'm not going to get the exact law correct, so you definitely need to look this up. But Kelly Dobbs Bunting, look her up on LinkedIn. She talks about this. She just shared some information that's really fascinating coming out of the EEOC. And when it comes to the tools that we are using inside of our organization, the technology we're using that has generative AI built into it, and that there might be some legal liability to the employer if you are allowing that software to be used and you find out that it has bias in it. That's very fascinating. So that's some legislation we need to look at. As far as AI related lawsuits, there's a couple in the works, but none have hit any yet where we're seeing many legislation changes yet. That being said, ethics is the biggest one. So if you're utilizing a tool that has generative AI in it and they don't have an ethics statement, find it. Find out how they're building that product and how they're using that generative AI, because everything we're reading, the biggest thing is there continues to have to be human intervention. So you can't use a recruiting platform that spits out a candidate for you and there's no human intervention to it, right? That's the key right there, that human intervention piece.
Excellent. I'm going to pause on the Q&A. I still got a list to go through. I'm pausing. And if there's time left at the end, I'll hit you with a few more questions.
Okay. So next up is communication, right? When I started in HR, for those of you who may have worked in these environments, communication involved going into the bathroom stall and putting the piece of paper in the plastic thing. So as people were using the bathroom, they could get your communications, right? Next, we've changed to corporate newsletters. A lot of you might still do that, monthly newsletter for your organization. Something that we switched to at Paylocity, which I think has had a lot of traction. And Ellie, feel free to share later if anybody asks you about this, but we do an internal news show every week. I'm fortunate I get to host it. It's SNL style. It's a lot of fun, but it's the main way that we get our communication out to our employees about everything they need to know. Additionally, we do an every other week QA with our entire leadership team. So think about, your CEO, your CFO, your chief diversity officer, your CHRO, get on a call, and it's like an AMA for our employees. So that's a lot to consider offering that, but we've had a lot of really great feedback from our employees on the transparency. And when we get asked tough questions, we answer them, and or we say like, that's a great question, I want to think about it and get back to you, right? So we're showing that transparency there. But when it comes to communication overall, right, listen carefully to what your employees need. Be clear and concise when you're communicating messages, especially from management, right? Don't be ambiguous about what's happening or what's coming down the pike for people. Use examples to illustrate your point. I shared a few stories today. Stories stick with people. So if you can weave a story into a communication, definitely do that. And then continue to encourage that open dialogue, right? And when I say open dialogue, I don't necessarily mean opening the door for a lot of conflicts or a lot of everybody gets a voice, everybody's opinion is going to affect things, but be willing to listen and create avenues for that. Next is change, right? Change is inevitable. And I think we always think that change is going to be like that plan, right? My line is like step A, step B, step C, or no plan where it's just chaos. But real life, right, is kind of this ebb and flow as we go through. And when it comes to different things, when change. So make sure that you're empowering your employees as you go through different pieces of change. Develop that clear strategy. Make sure that you're willing to pivot if you need to. For those that might be Friends watchers, right? I think about that couch and the whole pivot situation whenever I think about change management, right? Think about how you can create cultures inside your organizations with that psychological safety that breeds more innovation. So I'm going to go through the next slides a little bit quick, Robert, because I want to make sure I get to them. So if anybody wants to reach out to me afterwards for any more details, I can do that. I wanted to give you a leading change model. If you didn't have one in your organization yet, to think about how you can lead change, right? It starts with an awareness. Announce the change really, really far in advance. Give people plenty of time to grieve the change if they need to think about it, because then you're going to move to that desire phase, right? Where you're going to find those champions and you're going to find your naysayers, right? Listen to your naysayers. Maybe they'll say something you didn't think about, right? Some piece you need to bring into your change management plan. Next, think about knowledge. How are you going to train them and give them the know-how to do the thing the different way that they need to do it, right? Ability, measure those metrics. Think about dry ones. And then this last one is reinforcement. This is what I will tell you that I've learned throughout many, many years in HR is you have to remove the old way of doing it if you want your change to be successful. We all know as people that there's always that 1, 2, or 3 people in your org who get to do it whatever way they want to do it, right? Like, oh, this is the process, but like we do it this way for Jim, right? Stop doing that, right? It's not productive for your business. Make sure that you are implementing a change and that it's sticking across the board. Next is around technology, right? I wanted to make sure we talked a little bit about technology. Make sure that you're staying up to date on technology and using the right tools. You know, this is something that I think we can either get really right in our organization or really bad. Is the technology we're using helping us reach our business goals faster, more efficiently? Or are they a step where, hey, we just kind of always done it this way. This is the tool we use. So really think about your tech stack and evaluate it annually to think about, do I need to pull new tools in? Next, as I kind of wrap up the discussion, this is interesting. So this is what Gartner thinks is coming in the next 10 years. I think a lot of these we are already seeing. So obviously today we talked about middle management having different responsibilities and needing to level up. Upskilling and digital dexterity are going to outweigh tenure and experience. I think we're already seeing that. People that are coming into the organization who've got this digital dexterity and can help us move through things quicker. Employee data collection will expand. This is one I'm going to keep a really close eye on, because what I mean by this is, are we going to start doing things like biometric scanning, right? If you have Clear check right now through the airport, you'll know that when you use Clear, they scan your retinas for your identification, right? Are we going to be having our retina scan to log into our computers? Those kinds of things. Smart machines will become our colleagues, something to think about. People are going to start to work more for purpose and passion than just money. And then remote work balance will review challenges. We're already seeing this. We're already seeing this epidemic of loneliness when it comes to the rise of remote work. So that is the thrust of my deck. I did want to leave this last slide for you guys. I'd love to connect on LinkedIn. One of the things I think we didn't mention is I host a podcast. It's called HR Mixtape. It's all things business and HR. So I will pause there again and just put this last slide up. And Robert, we can go back to some questions.
I will have to check out your podcast. That's cool. All right. First question is a great connection to the previous slide, and it's about AI, and it's a question, I'm paraphrasing here. Will it help upskill, and is it all positive? Let's say upskill that 2 to 5 year experience person and kind of exponentially grow their efficiency and effectiveness. But could it also, at the detriment of those 10 to 15 year experience, more senior, maybe more expensive folks like myself? You know, so as an employer, could some use it not for the power of good, but for the power of evil, to just hire a lot of 2 to 5 year experienced people and then use technology to level them up for very cheap instead of hiring really experienced people? What do you think?
Yeah, I love this question. I think it's both. And this is what I mean by that. I think if you hired just all more digital dexterity people, they don't have the experience, then they're bringing textbook knowledge, right? That's what AI is, right? It's textbook knowledge. So, I can tell you a lot of things about HR, but until I stepped into the role of having to deal with an employee crying in my office, getting screamed at, having to deal with some really difficult employee investigations and terminations, you can't learn that from a textbook. You need the experience. And so to be very successful, one of the things that we're seeing is organizations starting to develop these cross mentorship programs where you have the more experienced people in the organization giving them kind of the lay of the land knowledge, right? The knowledge that they've gained throughout their careers. And then you have the reverse mentorship where those that have more digital dexterity are coming in and sharing that. Specifically when it comes to AI, I think it's something that is not going to replace those with larger experience. I think it's actually going to elevate them even more. So if you think about some of the things that as you get higher and higher in your career, you do lose touch with some things. And AI is a great tool for you as well to dive in and say like, hey, I'd like to learn more about this. Can you walk me through it, right? Instead of having to do all this hours of research and training. So
Question number 2 is, you talked about leadership, finding leaders, making leaders. And we had a question around how some don't want it, growing number, and or are not skilled at it. And have you seen some best practices in that area? How to find leaders when it seems like fewer people want it and have the skill?
Yeah, so I think when you're looking at your succession planning and you're doing that 9-box assessment, right, where you're looking at your high performers, something that sometimes we miss is the passion piece, right? Not everybody wants to be a leader. Some people just want to go really, really deep in their role. So I think you have to have people raise their hand to be leaders. I think when we put people into leadership, just because they were great at X role, right? That's the Peter principle. They're not necessarily going to be a great leader. So let's have people raise their hands. Second thing is, let's have a leadership development program, right? Think about this 2 years before you actually need them to be a leader, right? Can you develop an emerging leader program where they're learning some of these skills? Think about the financial skills that leaders need, right? Can you start teaching them that kind of financial business acumen? Can you start teaching them how to think more strategically and connect the dots, how they may do workforce planning, right? Build those programs if you don't have them.
You had a great slide on technology. And even if you looked at it sort of platform agnostic, maybe this is specific to Paylocity, or maybe this is any HRIS tool, any underutilized tools, reports, dashboards that would be like a good call to action, like, hey, gosh, if you're a Paylocity customer or just whatever system you use, I bet you're not, or your people aren't looking at this tool, this report, this dashboard that we should be.
Yeah, I like this question. I haven't gotten it before. If your tool gives you access to a utilization dashboard, and what I mean by that is how your employees are actually using the tool. If you can get to that data, run that report, do that, because then you're going to find out where they are spending the most time inside of that system. So if you purchase that system to increase communication and collaboration, are they spending their time using the tool that way? Or are they just using it to go look at their paycheck, right? That's going to give you a lot of really interesting information, especially if your tool might have journaling, a performance management component where you're asking them to go in and update goals. See how much time is being spent there and if it's being utilized the way that you think it should be utilized and or want it to be utilized.
Sherry, in part of your presentation, you talked about teams and collaboration and listening and seeking feedback and including employees in the change process. But a question popped up with that framework. Hey, the same employees seem to be volunteering for everything and are getting burned out. So like they want to do it, they want to do all that stuff, but it's like the 7, 8 people all the time. How do you get the other people to be part of that change process, to be part of the leadership from all ranks, to be inclusive, like,
yeah,
without making it.
Right. If you haven't looked at the DISC model of team communication, I'm going to just put a pin in that for you guys to go look into that. I won't dive into it too much, but what the model says is that you're going to have people who are always going to be hand raisers, right? dominant personalities, right? But you have a whole host of other personalities and communication methods that don't have that high kind of, I'm going to volunteer for. So a couple things. Ask people. If you see people have communicated in your one-on-ones that they want to be leaders, but they're not raising their hands, they might think that they're not qualified, especially for women. This is especially true for women. Ask them to step into the roles. Give them stretch assignments to experience that leadership a little bit. And then the last thing is make sure that your process of picking people is not introducing accidental bias. So, maybe you have a very first level, hey, we're going to do this project. We're going to send out a survey. Anybody who wants to do it can fill out the survey and raise your hand. And then as a leadership team, look at the people on that list and go, hey, I'm surprised so-and-so's not on this list. I know that this is a highly detailed project, and I know that they are a highly detailed person. I think they might be a good fit. Let's go find out why they didn't raise their hand.
Last question, only for time. I've got them stacked. Is back when we were talking about remote and hybrid, a question perked up around workers' comp, kind of a compliance question. Any rulings coming out around remote and hybrid, and like what's travel? When do you have to play what business? Should they be clocked in? What is mileage? Is that kind of worked out through the system about making sure you're in like compliance and regulation with a remote and hybrid and like business?
Yeah, I haven't seen too much chatter on this, to be totally honest. So I can't speak to a specific legislation. I will tell you though, if you have not built a really robust remote work policy, here's your time to do it, because that's what people are going back to. Is outlining in there very clearly about what your expectation is when you're working remote. So for example, do you care if the person is the sole child caregiver during remote hours? Those are things you have to think about and build into your policies.
This has been so fantastic. I hit you rapid fire with questions and you covered it all. It was awesome. I'm a super fan of the ADKAR model by ProSci. I am a certified ProSci change management practitioner. So that was music to my ears. So well done. Super fan of that. And just a couple of closing notes here. So one is a little call to action, I think, is to download the ChatGPT app. Check it out, OpenAI. I just did it. I've been hearing about it for a year and I finally just did it. And it is actually kind of fun to use. And I will give you a warning. If you put in there, write me a rap about accounting as if Lil Jon wrote it, it's actually really good. But if you ask it to like put together a grid on the state tax laws for a specific situation, it will do it. And like 25% of it is an absolute lie or wrong. So it's like a really smart 15-year-old. Like it's pretty good, but it will also lie. And I think that we need another call to action. Number 2 is let's have a goal to level up in the new year. Not only a new you, how about the rest of your team? Let's level up the rest of our teams, mentor, support, be an ally of the rest of the organization. I think that might be a good personal goal for Robert Bendetti. And then I'm taking another call to action. Number 3 is around partnership, like Paylocity. If you're like, I'm not a therapist, I don't understand these rules and compliance, and I don't have this technology, call your HR team members, call your partners like Paylocity. If your partner's like doesn't have this kind of horsepower, then maybe you need to call Paylocity and speak to awesome people like Ellie in the Upstate or Lauren in Greenville, and the rest of the team, and Sherry and the rest of the team are absolutely fantastic. And most importantly, as we close, like, comment, and reshare my content on LinkedIn. I'm going to say that Sherry did an awesome job, and you give her a little like, a comment, and a repost. Excellent. Thank you all very much. And I hope everyone has a wonderful day. And I'm so glad you liked that picture that I started off with, Sherry. I was so worried that you weren't going to like it. And I'm like so happy that you did.
This was wonderful. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.